How in the hell did we get here with John Zink is brought to you by IT Avalon. Visit our sponsor at itavalon.com. Now, here's John Zink.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the How in the Hell Did We Get Here podcast. I'm your host, John Zink. I'm honored today to be joined by Mr. Dr. Zafar Chaudary. He is the SVP, CIO, and Chief Digital Officer at Seattle Children's Hospital. Welcome to the podcast, Doctor.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Now, you were born in Pakistan.
I was born in Pakistan, and I moved to the UK when I was one. Actually, Manchester in the UK, which is where I grew up.
Okay. And now you're in Seattle. How long have you been in Seattle?
7 years now.
Now, everybody that comes in the podcast kind of fills out a questionnaire so I can get more in depth with everybody. You've been all over the world as far as different places you've worked and lived and stuff. Kind of take us through your journey.
So a pretty convoluted journey. So growing up in the UK and sort of culturally, as I was growing up, I wasn't given much of a choice. Either I was going to be a doctor or a dentist. And I actually said to my dad, I want to be an electrician. Then there was a loud smack on the back of my head, and it was like, doctor or dentist? So I said, well, it's probably better to treat people than to put your hands in people's mouths. So I became a doctor, and I came and I started my medical journey. But growing up, my father had multiple businesses. So he had a car dealership, and he also had a manufacturing business. We were manufacturing cooking oil. So part of the other cultural thing was growing up learning how to do all those businesses. So I'm a pretty good German car mechanic, as well as a forklift driver and a semi-truck driver, as well as a physician who then came over to the US, trained. I'm an internist, and evolved into the dark side, which is health IT. I've been in this business in health IT now for 37 years, but along the way, I've had, should I say, multiple stops in my journey. So being in Chicago for 12 years, working in medicine, then working in .com before it went .bomb. Prior to that, working with the WHO on a project in the Caribbean. Went back home to the UK to work, to actually close out my dad's business and sell it to Kraft Food, and then got into the sort of CIO business over there with the Women's Hospital in Liverpool and then the Children's Hospital. Spent about 12 years in the UK NHS. And one day Gartner came a-calling, and I thought this was intriguing. They wanted me to do international work. I didn't think I had lots of international experience, so it was an opportunity. They said they would fly me all over the place, which they did. Did about 1 million miles in 3.5 years, worked for multiple governments and health systems, all the way up to Auckland, Singapore, Australia, the Middle East, parts of Europe, some US healthcare systems as well. So it's quite an interesting journey. Became sort of their Epic expert in the space. And one day was sitting at a client at Cambridge University Hospital in the UK. They were implementing Epic, and they were like, well, we're going to pay you a lot of money, or your company a lot of money. Why don't you just come and work for us as our CIO? And I thought, well, that's not a bad idea. It's a well-known place. Let's do that. And did that, worked on some outsourcing, sorting out, optimizing their Epic. And then Seattle Children's came a-calling and said, come visit Seattle in June, of all times. And I arrived in June, and it was lovely, beautiful. Didn't realize the weather was just like the UK till I actually started the job in November. And
they only bring people to Seattle in June.
Yeah, I think that's what they do. And so they brought me in and said they had a few things to sort out. They were a Cerner shop at the time. And, you know, sometimes as you take your journey, what I always say to people is, it's not about who the employer is, it's who you actually work for. So I've been lucky enough in my journey to have good people, usually CEOs, who are forward-thinking, who allow me the latitude to do what I need to do, which is important, without micromanaging. And I've always seemed to stumble upon good people in my journey. So every CEO I've worked for has been really good and open to change, as well as open to supporting a different way of thinking. So I think you come and work for people. So I came to Seattle because our CEO is very forward thinking, physician, ex-military, very charismatic, but at the same time, very open to listening to new things. And so I've been here now 7 years. So yeah, it's been a long 37 years, I would say.
Well, it's a great journey story. What I want to tell our listeners and our viewers is you were named Seattle CIO of the Year in Healthcare Orby Awards in 2022, and you were named 2022 Chime AHA Transformational Leadership Award winner. He's also been a finalist for the Seattle CIO of the Year Orby Awards in 3 different years. Also a member of the Global Elite List Constellations Business Transformation 150 in 2020. And that recognizes the top global executives leading business transformation efforts in their organizations. He's got a bunch of other stuff as well, but just kind of what I'd like to know is, you were talking about the smack in the back of the head. You're going to be a dentist or a doctor, right? What other ways did your upbringing and personal experiences kind of shape your journey to becoming a healthcare leader?
Yeah, so John, I feel very blessed and honored that I've won a whole bunch of awards in my journey of 37 years, but it's never about that. It's about whether or not I had an impact. And most importantly, I wouldn't have achieved any of that without the people that work for me, right? And with me. Reality is, I'm just steering the ship, and all my people are doing all the work on the ground. And I always tell them, you make me look good because you do a good job and you focus on the work at hand, which is supporting our clinicians and our patients, parents, and caregivers, certainly in the pediatric space. But what I've learned in my journey is, to be a good leader, sometimes you have to be able to do the work that you assign other people. And growing up in a cultural environment where, my father was an immigrant to the UK in 1965 and started off with nothing. We grew up really poor, sometimes no food to eat, to my dad becoming a multimillionaire and having everything that he ever wanted. And then me having the ability to go to medical school and other things. He never skimped on the fact that I had to put my full effort in. So if I wasn't studying to be the doctor or do my exams, etc., he was always, well, you need to come into the business. You need to learn the business. You need to know how to wash a car, how to detail a car, how to change the oil, service the car, change the plugs, valet the car, write up the service ticket, do the manufacturing, load a truck, drive a forklift. And, there was times on weekends I was like, oh my God, I want to cry, right? Because I don't think I grew up very athletic, but I tell you, it's pretty difficult loading a 20-foot truck with really heavy cans of oil by hand, because that was the era of that. And then realizing going home on a Saturday night that I probably should have been out on the town, but actually I wasn't, because I was soaking myself because every part of my body ached. But it really grounds you in, can you do the work yourself before you assign it to other people? And working in a commodity sort of business, I also learned the business side of what I now see health IT to be, right? So health IT isn't about how many servers and storage devices I can buy. Granted, they might be sexy because they have flashy lights, but the reality is, I'm a business person trying to navigate the murky waters of healthcare with my doctors, nurses, allied health professionals, helping in throughput, getting that access sorted. And if that happens to be with a piece of technology, so be it. But truth be told, a neurosurgeon who's drilling into the head of a kid isn't thinking about an EMR. They're not thinking about, does that wireless printer work? They're thinking about, I'm saving this kid's life. I'm cutting out that tumor. And their assumption is everything around them is working. The worst thing that could happen is you're looking at an X-ray or an MRI scan of a brain whilst trying to operate on it, and the IT fails. Then what do you do? Because you're already drilled into the brain, right? So there's that assumption that things have to work. And that's why we're a support service in the back of that space. So I think as people evolve through their journey in their career, it's never harmful to participate in things that you might not be skilled in or trained in. And the best example I can use is there's nothing wrong with going out on the floors and rounding. There's nothing wrong with helping your desktop technicians install desktops, replace monitors. Why? Because A, you'll learn a new skill, and B, you'll kind of understand what they face. Because a lot of times you sit with people and they say, well, you don't understand what I'm facing. Well, if you've been out there, you'll know what they're facing and how difficult it is working in a really high pressured ED environment whilst you're trying to change 10 monitors and everybody's, jumping on top of you because you're getting in their way. Because that's what happens, right? When it's a high paced environment. So I think that's certainly something I've learned in my journey is as you evolve as a leader, try to learn things that make you uncomfortable, participate, and that will make you more successful, but always build the best team ever. And if you do that, yeah, you'll win lots of prizes. You really will.
Interesting. While you were talking there, I was thinking about, my company, I own a company called IT Avalon. It's an IT staffing company. And started the company 12 years ago, and I've done everything, so it's like every person who works for me, I know their job, and I think that's very important from a leadership standpoint is like everything that you'll go through, I've either already gone through it or will go through it with you.
Yeah.
And I think the feeling that the employee gets from that is very important.
Yeah. Plus it gives them time to speak directly to the leader of the group when they probably would want to ask questions, but never get the opportunity. At the end of the day, I've got 500 people in my team. If I don't go out and spend some time with them or ask them to come and spend time with me, how are they ever going to get any face time?
Yeah.
Healthcare is funny because it's all committee driven. So you spend most of your day in committees trying to navigate the system level issues. But the most important thing in any health system are the people, right? Because we're a people business. Right. I always told my team, we're not in the business of health IT. We're in the business of patients. Always keep that in your mind. So it's not about buying the next shiny toy or having the fastest server or, having CPU-based, graphics-based cards. It's about what problem are you trying to solve and how are you going to solve it? And sometimes that'll be with technology. And sometimes that will be with simple listening and communication. And I have to do the same for my team. So I do maintain that open door policy. But when I'm on the floor chatting to my technicians, I love chatting to them. Truth be told, they're the funnest people I meet on a daily basis because super down to earth and they'll have a good laugh with you at the end of the day versus going to a very difficult committee meeting where everybody's all, argumentative versus trying to move forwards in a collaborative way. So I think if you've done that in your own company, then when somebody comes to you that's doing a particular task in a particular organization as part of that, and they try to explain it to you, you're not going to look baffled, are you? You're going to be like, oh, I get that. And this is how we think we can solve that issue.
So where did you go back to the beginning of your healthcare career? How did you start out in healthcare? Were you a doctor, clinician, or?
I did. I went on a stint with the WHO. They sent me to work in the Caribbean, which was very eye-opening to work in a hospital and hospitals that would lose power halfway through a surgery, didn't have all the resources. You learn a lot about resource management when you work in a developing country because they're still able to treat patients, but they treat patients with less than half the resources you would see in any US hospital. I remember performing surgery one night, the lights went out. We didn't have a generator. Well, we did, but there was no diesel for the generator. So they were like, well, let's break out the flashlights then, because we have to finish this job. Otherwise, the patient's, right in front of you will open. And it's the same thing with hygiene, right? At the end of the day, we didn't have the fancy scrubs. We had soap and a bar of soap and a really rough brush, and you would spend 10 minutes scrubbing in to make sure your hands were super clean before you gloved up and did the work, right? So you learn a lot about resource management and doing that more for less, which is quite interesting, because if you look at healthcare now in the US with tight margins, guess what? We're now trying to do more for less. And I don't feel uncomfortable in that space because I'm like, oh, this is what it is, right? But had I have
You're
grown
like,
up,
I have a lot more than I did
yeah.
when we're using flashlights.
And I always tell people, I said, we are super blessed in hospitals in the United States, because we have the skill sets, various skill sets, we have the resources, we have people we can collaborate with that can help us. We're never alone. We're really never alone. But when you're working in developed countries, if you're trying to deal with a trauma, you could be an internist like me and realize, well, it's a trauma and there's no other doctor on duty. So what the hell are you going to do? Because if you don't do anything, that person will probably die and it will probably be your fault.
Right.
So it does open your eyes. And so when I came back to the US after doing that stint and was working in a hospital in Chicago, what I found was there was an opportunity where they were asking clinical people to volunteer to learn about technology and participate. And I thought, this is great because it'll get me off some shifts, right? So if I participate in this stuff, this was green screen. We're talking early 90s, right? You had to memorize keyboards and people thought you had to talk into a mouse versus use it. And I was pretty not very on board with that. So I wanted to learn, and I learned along the way. And one of the things that's happened to me in my career journey is every team I've ever had has challenged me really hard with comments like, you're just a physician playing in IT. So every time I've had these comments from different teams I've had in different organizations, I've actually gone back and gotten more education to ratify the ability to do that. So that's why I have not only my medicine degree, but multiple degrees in IT, business, healthcare, policy, management, just because I never wanted to be the person who was playing in IT, but I did want to be the person who seemed to be somewhat informed in what I was doing. And so, yeah, I had to learn how to program in COBOL and Java. Oh my God, that was not very easy for somebody who's, science minded versus logic minded. But right. I learned it and I built applications and I wrote code. And, I even now, I was fixing my own laptop the other day and I was like, well, I'm going to have to edit the registry. And I did it because I remembered how to do that. So I've taken the journey of learning along the way. So there's no harm in continuous professional development is the point that I'm getting at here, right? Just because you think you're amazing, there's always someone better and you can always learn something from someone. I'm absolutely amazed at what I learn from the employees at my organization. And that's everyone. I mean, the other day I was rounding in the kitchen of all places, because one day I was in the cafeteria and they make really good food in our organization. And I was like, wow, they do such a good job and this food's so great and it's so cost effective. And I said, I can't remember the last time I actually went to see the people who make the food. And I hadn't. So I decided to go and see the people who made the food and then realized that they had some IT issues because we had a menu ordering system that would send the request down to this kitchen. And they had these little printers bringing out slips of paper with orders on them. And people were, as an assembly line, fulfilling those orders and sending them back to the patients and the parents that ordered the food. I learned a super amount. I learned a lot about how a manufacturing line in a cafeteria works, but also learned the fact that they had some issues with card processing, with paper orders versus electronic that they could have. So had I have never done that, I wouldn't have known that they actually could have done with some help, which have said, yeah, well, absolutely, you call me if you need help when you're planning on how to make this more automated versus paper-based. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't had the idea of, and it all stemmed, truth be told, it all stemmed from a great chili. So I'm like, wow, I must go and find out who made this food. And I did. the chefs. And I was like, well, thank you for the amazing food you make for us as employees at a very great price, because, that keeps us going as a health system.
And curiosity is everything. I just reminded of something I say all the time. If you're not growing, you're dying. If you're not learning, you're dying. It's like, I'll be 52 here on Friday. And it's like, I can't believe I'm like, how the hell did I turn 52, But it leads back to a good segue I was doing some research for another podcast a couple weeks ago and looked back only 100 years ago. The average lifespan of a person was just around 42 years. 200 years ago, it was less than 35 years old. The advances in healthcare over the last 200 years, and it's just amazing. Now what is it, 75, 72? I don't even know what the average lifespan is today of a man.
Yeah, I think it's about 76 in the US.
Okay. Over double what it was a couple hundred years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Where do you see it going in the future with all the things that are happening right now?
Well, I think we're going to continue to innovate. Certainly now that you've injected technology into healthcare, no doubt we had a pandemic. No doubt we came up with an amazing vaccine. Some amazing scientists helped deliver that. But that would not have been made possible if there weren't advances not only in medicine, but also in the technological manufacture of said vaccines, some of these new techniques. So I think we're only going to continue to innovate, probably provide longer lifespans. The challenge we're now facing, though, is as the population ages, well, then who looks after the aging population?
Right.
So it's great to say, well, I'm going to live to 90 because I can take 17 pills and they'll take care of most things and keep me alive. But the other thing I also like to think about is, what is the quality of life we're offering as part of that? And with an aging population, as your parents, like my parents, they're over 80 and they've had multiple health conditions. At some point, who's going to take care of them? And what is the system, the social system we build in our country to achieve that? Because if we don't focus on that, you're going to find there's a lot of aged people who've got nowhere to go and nobody to look after them. So it's great to be, on one angle, you're going to live longer, but at the same time, I think we owe it to the population to say, yeah, you could be 70 and you might live to 90, but that 70 to 90 transition whilst you're retired is going to be a good transition. You're going to enjoy your life because you put all this effort in, supporting the country, and now it's your time, but not if you're struggling to find a place to live, or who's going to take care of you, or how are you going to afford your medication. Those are all huge worries that people have. That's why you see so much of the workforce over 65 going back to work, because they need the extra money to pay for all the things that they need and conditions that they need to manage. My father, for example, has had multiple heart conditions, multiple surgeries. He's on 12, 14 pills a day, which is great because they're now available. And like you said, 25 years ago, he wouldn't have made it this far. But I also have to always make sure that his quality of life is somewhat decent. Otherwise, sitting at home and just eating pills is not the strategy either, right?
No, it's not living.
No, it's not.
So big thing today, machine learning and AI. How does that, what are some of the new innovations that are improving pediatric healthcare outcomes when it comes to machine learning and AI that you can kind of fill us in on?
Yeah, so I think the whole Gen AI is the newest shiny toy on the block, right? I think machine learning was always happening. AI was there, but the language model was smaller, right? Because initially, the model we would have is the language of the data that we have in our systems. But that's now expanding and broadening our horizons. And I think at Seattle Children's, we've been looking at data science for a long time. And what we've learned is we can write algorithms that benefit patient outcomes. And that's the most important thing, right? We want the patient, A, to be healthy when they leave our organization. B, stay healthy so they don't come back. The interesting thing about healthcare is you actually don't want people to get sick. And therefore you don't want them to come to hospital, which kind of is contrary to the way business, right? Because fundamentally, the ideal scenario for us is we come up with enough hope, care, and cures that people never come to us, and therefore we don't have much of a business to sustain. That would be great, because that would mean kids in the Pacific Northwest would be super healthy. So we've looked at different initiatives. One example would be if a child has brain surgery, the first 24 hours after brain surgery, the child is at very high risk of having a stroke. And it's very hard to predict if that's going to happen. And if it does happen, you can only imagine the child might not survive, or the side effects might be huge of having a stroke. You might lose motor function, etc. So we built algorithms. We've taken all the data from the ICU bedside, and we're now able to predict before it happens that it's going to happen in that patient, so we can take some corrective action. And that's very accurate as an algorithm. So that's how we're improving patient outcomes with that use of AI and machine learning. Alternatively, we've also applied it to equity. So we can tell how kids fare when we put them to sleep using opioids, and when we prescribe opioids post-surgery for them to go home to manage pain. And we use these tools, and what we found is we can now do opioid-free surgery, because you don't want kids to get addicted to opioids. It's a big problem nationally.
Yep,
actually,
huge.
It's a problem in all groups. And so we've been able to use the data to model ways in which we can avoid prescribing those opioids at all. And we've surpassed over 10,000 opioid-free surgeries. So
do you use a different type of
so
medication?
we've used the data to come up with a cocktail that isn't addictive, can manage pain, but doesn't require the use of any form of opioid.
That's awesome.
So that's great, right? Because as a parent, the worst nightmare you can ever have is your child has shoulder surgery, is given pain medication, and can't get off that pain medication. That's the biggest nightmare you're ever going to have in your life, if your kid gets addicted to an opioid. And that's been a problem even in the adult space across the nation. Opioid deaths are still there. So if we can do anything, this is how data, machine learning, AI has helped us change the matrix for us, right? And I think that's important. So it's just a tool, though. So what I would say is we use it, people should use the new Gen AI functions, but it's a tool for informed practice, right? It's not going to overtake. I always assure my clinicians that this isn't going to put you out of a job. This is just going to help you speed up the work that you do. You can't write away 15, 20 years of experience with an AI.
No. It's funny. I talk to people about that too in the recruiting business, the staffing business. It's like, if I go back to when I first started 27, 28 years ago, whatever it was, I didn't have a computer on my desk. I was a technical recruiter that did not have a computer on my desk. So I would look through the Sunday Star Tribune, because I lived in Minneapolis. And then we would just go through and cold call people as far as when we were recruiting them, because there was no other way. Fast forward to today, you've got Monster, you've got Dice, you've got all these different tools that you can use, but it still comes back to what you and I are doing right now. Having a conversation, building trust. When I'm talking to either a client, prospective client, or a prospective employee, it comes back to building that human trust between two people and building a relationship. That's never going to go away.
No, I don't think so. And one thing is really come to the forefront for me over the last few months is people need connection for your mental health, right? You can't live in a virtual world all day, all night. You need to connect with people, even if you're the world's biggest introvert, and I am, right? You might not say that, but I'm a massive introvert. I don't like talking to people, and here I am talking to you.
You're
But
doing a hell of a job.
I wouldn't get to know you, John, if we didn't have this conversation, right? So you have to sometimes overcome your fears of having that conversation and connect with people. And I think that sometimes we lose that art. Certainly the Gen Zs spend a lot of time on social media and technology and then don't acquire the skills which are needed, which is that one-to-one communication, that hand holding. I'm not being funny, but if I'm sick and I go to my doctor and my doctor is going to give me some bad news, I don't want that from an AI. If I'm going to die from cancer, I want you to hold my hand and tell me that and
Right.
tell me how you're going to help me through this. Not, here's an AI, will say, with a nice, empathetic face. And, well, yeah, you've got this condition and you're not going to make it, right? That's not what people want. That's why when you look at telemedicine went to almost 95% utilization in the pandemic because we couldn't see each other. But when I look at my health system now, we're right back down to 25.9% use of telemedicine, which is sort of the sweet spot, right?
Right.
So people were like, oh, well, no, people will just continue to consume this. No, people want to see their doctor, their nurse, their care provider. They need handholding. They need that FaceTime. So I think connecting with people is still going to be very important. And it's harder if you work in a support service because you tend to hide out in a room, in a dark room, and enter information into a machine, right? I mean, I can say that sometimes I have days where I've got hundreds of emails and I'm snowed under with emails. But then you have to engage with people. Otherwise, how? And I do agree with you. The whole recruiting process is AI based, which can help you find candidates quicker. But unless you actually have that conversation with the person, how are you going to know that person's persona, right? Because if you read, it's like reading somebody's bio, right? You sort of gave a portion of my bio in the beginning, and it's somewhat embarrassing because people read my bio and it's got a lot of stuff that I've done because I've been around a long time. But I don't think it reflects me as a person. I think it's just a data point in my life. If you actually spoke to me, you probably realize that I'm not as mean as I look, right? So, but you wouldn't know that until you actually had a conversation with me and realized, I try to be as down to earth as I can because I realize that we're not going to get through this world without helping each other. And that's really how life has to be.
I think it's a huge part of it. And to go back to the opioid thing you were talking about. So another part of my story is coming up here on May the 5th, Cinco de Mayo, I've got 10 years sober. And sobriety was a huge thing for me. Just over 10 years ago, drinking was a big thing for me. But I've seen so many people come through the halls of 12-step programs that got started on their path to using, drinking, whatever it is, because of an injury where they got hooked on an opioid. So if AI can help in that journey to get people off of that path, what a blessing that would be.
It would, and it's hard, right? Because there's multiple addictions that people suffer from, but if you think about how you recover from them, yes, AI can be one component in that journey. But most importantly, with sort of AA programs, as you know, right, you must have had a great sponsor.
Oh, amazing! Still have a great sponsor. Numerous people that are absolute angels,
right,
in my life.
Held your hand, helped you through the dark times to the bright times. That wouldn't have happened with an AI, in my opinion.
Yeah. To go back to that point, in the middle of the pandemic, when everything went from being face-to-face meetings to being Zoom meetings, I was just kind of lost. And I sat down and I started writing a book. And that was my therapy. Writing that book was my therapy to get through that, because I still had my guys, my sponsor, and other people to talk to, but it wasn't the same as sitting in a meeting and just, spilling your guts out to everybody else that was there, which is my therapy. So today we're back to face-to-face meetings, and it's great. But there was many people, because they didn't have that human touch during the pandemic, that not only fell off the wagon but are dead today because they didn't have that human interaction that they had before.
Yeah, and I think that's why we have such a mental health crisis in all age groups right now, because the hardest hit were probably the teens, the Gen Zs. They went from doing all these activities in school with their friends, football, soccer, whatever they were doing, to not doing any of that, to then trying to live their life on social media. And, every negative comment on social media would hit them hard.
Right.
And then they didn't know what to do with it. Because, a lot of times if you've got a good family unit at home, even to today, if I've got a major issue, I'm still going to call my mum, right? And I'm going to have that conversation with my mother, and she's going to tell me I'm wrong and put me straight, right? And I'm an old person, and I still need that, and I'm glad to have it. But if I had to rely on social media to guide me, I'd be a basket case, right?
Yeah, we'd be a mess if we had to deal with that. And I have a 5-year-old at home. Little Johnny is 5 years old, and he plays around on kids' YouTube. But other than that, I have him outside riding his bike and doing all that stuff as much as possible, because that stuff scares the living hell out of me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think technology has its place in our world. I love it. I utilize it. But there's also times in the day that I know I have to put it down. And I actively encourage that going analog for a short period of time in your day, there's nothing wrong with it. That's why at work, when people say, what's the best way to reach you? I say, phone me. Don't TikTok me or Instagram me. Phone me. I'll pick up the phone. We'll have a chat. Because you know what? It's so much better than what we're seeing in the workplace, where people will send you 14 emails and essay-long emails, and you'll still never get to the bottom of the problem. Whereas one simple conversation you can solve for most cases. Because it's really hard to understand context in technology.
That's it.
Right? So if we were doing this conversation and I didn't see you at all, I would be oblivious and blind to what your reaction is to what I'm saying versus being able to see you at least. And someday I'll probably look forward to meeting you in 3D versus 2D. And we won't have a drink, but we'll have a non-alcoholic cocktail together, because I don't drink either. And so that's where the real connections come, right? That's why this concept of breaking bread with people is so useful, right? You can have a great conversation over a slice of pizza, right? You can.
My ears just perked up on that one. Slice of pizza and me, that goes together.
Absolutely. Yeah. So these are things we have to think through that sometimes you forget when you're going through that busy day. And the other thing I've sort of learned in my journey traveling the world is we may be working way too hard in this country for what we need to. We actually can focus your mind better. So if we take the example of the French take 2 months off in summer. And yet when you see them at work, they're very, very productive and they get through the volume of work. I always tell my team, you've got to know in a day, when is a good time to stop? Just stop. If you've done a solid day's work, stop. And then go and do the most important thing in your life, which has got to be your family. It's not work, by the way. Shouldn't live to work, right? Work is a means to take care of your family. But I always discourage people to work 12, 14, 15 hours a day, because I always say, have you evaluated how productive that day has been for you? Or are you just or is your head just spinning around and you're working yourself up into a tizzy, which is then not going to make you feel well?
Right. I think that putting together a plan for work, that's what I talk to my people about, is that instead of just kind of a shotgun blast approach, having a rifle approach to things, I'm going to do this for an hour, and then I'm going to take a break. I'm going to do this for 30 minutes. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to do this for an hour, but just having the plan put together, then you can do your whole day in 3 or 4 hours and then do the rest of your shotgun blast stuff the rest of the day. That's a huge part of what I think a lot of people are missing today in the workplace, is that I've got these 100 different things I've got to do, but no plan to actually get them done, doing a checklist to check them all off the board. Just kind of, I'm going to do whatever I can when I can do it.
I think it's spot on. I think in our day, when we get bombarded with so many different requests and issues, you get to that boiling point because the emails are coming in and it's just spinning your head. So you're 100% right. I do the same thing. So I actually still use pen and paper for my list of to-do. And everything that comes through on the email that has an action, I put it on my list. And what I've come to realize is if I try and attack 15 things at the same time, I'm not going to do them very well. My theory is always do 10 things well versus 100 things poorly. And so when I work through my list, it's satisfying to know that I actually can cross it off, even though the list is long. But when I look at the list from afar, I do feel a bit of panic. How the hell am I going to get through all those things? And then I've realized just work on one thing at a time and you'll absolutely get through it, versus worrying about the magnitude of the problem that sits on your desk. Yeah. So yeah, you can absolutely efficiently do your work in less time with more focus whilst taking breaks and trying to enjoy life. There's nothing wrong with, like you said, doing a solid 2 hours and then going for a 20-minute walk, especially if you live in an area where it's not raining, right? And then you come back and you've had some fresh air and then you're ready to start again, right? Or you go for a snack or you do whatever. Watch one of your favorite soap operas for 20 minutes and then come back to the grind of the day. That's fine with me, right? Because that breaks up the monotony of working yourself up into all the work that you have. And truth be told, none of us would have work if there wasn't work to do, right?
Let me switch gears for a second. I want to talk a little bit about your role and about Seattle Children's Hospital. So could you share with us a memorable success story where technology significantly improved patient care or operational efficiency at Seattle Children's Hospital?
Yeah, so the best example I can give you is, coming into the organization, realizing that we had a disjointed medical record and pretty much paper in outpatients. And it was, 2017, shouldn't have been the optics of our organization, right? So when we actually moved to a single integrated electronic medical record in a pandemic. Now, at this time of starting the project, we didn't know a pandemic was coming. Then a pandemic came and we said, why are we doing this? And the way in which this was communicated to the organization is I spent a lot of time trying to understand what the problem points were for my clinicians by going and observing their workflows. And from that, my team, we created a cartoon around a singular patient, a fictional patient called Lucy. And Lucy had acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which could be terminal if not treated. And we built the journey and created a cartoon of her journey at Seattle Children's. And then we played it back for the board and multiple clinical divisions. And it was sort of eye-opening because when you actually played back what the patient was experiencing and what the clinicians were experiencing from a workflow perspective, it was somewhat horrific. And that's when we decided we really needed to have an integrated way of having that clinical record in our organization available and also exchanging information with partner organizations in electronic format, not by fax, because it's mortifying to know that we still have faxes And it's really hard to find parts unless you go to eBay for a fax machine. So you've got to get momentum behind it. So that was a good transformation project. It was the biggest transformation project our organization had undertaken in like 30 years. And we managed to pull it off in a pandemic. And the outcome of that now is that parents have the information they need, clinicians have the information they need. And the biggest thing I can tell you is I remember meeting a patient in the discovery phase, a parent of a patient. Her child was having heart failure and needed a new heart. And they had moved to Seattle from California to get treatment here. And she came into the meeting with a wheelbarrow full of paper records. And she said, "This is what I bring every time I come to an appointment at your hospital. This is how difficult my life is trying to navigate my child's information because she's been sick that long." And that broke my heart, right? I mean, the reality is she's already dealing with the biggest pain anybody can deal with. And then we're adding to that by having this stack of paper. But at the end of the journey of implementing this integrated system, she came back to talk to the team. And she stood there and said, "I didn't bring my wheelbarrow because the only thing I need now is the thing I have in my hand. Thank you so much for changing my world and making my life just a little bit easier." And her child did get the heart surgery and transplant, and everything's good. But do you see what I mean? It feels like it's such a small thing, and it is. But if you are the person who has to deal with that, and you listen to that, and you try and change for that, that's the type of outcome, positive outcomes we've seen from having an integrated electronic medical record.
Now, let me ask you, from an outsider curiosity, if a kid comes in, parent brings in a kid, they're from out of town, never been to Seattle Children's Hospital before, and the kid's super sick. Are you able to get that kid's information from other hospitals around the country? Or how does that work? I mean, is that something that's in place today, or is that something that's being worked on, or how's that work?
Predominantly, the answer is yes. If the organization they're coming from uses Epic, because Epic is our EMR, that's not a problem at all, because all Epic systems are connected across the world, by the way. So we can get data from anywhere. There's an Epic site in seconds. If it's another medical record system, yes, we can do interconnectivity. So we've gone from not exchanging records electronically using fax to thousands of records per week are now being exchanged. So yes, in most cases, if they come from a partner organization, we will have access to the record. Now, of course, the parent has to consent to that, but they do if they want the information exchange. And then we can see the previous history and medications and allergies and everything else that has happened. And
So
that has changed.
How many years has that been available? Not many,
since
right?
we implemented, since 2020, when we went live with our system. Prior to that, you had to be faxed over and you had to wait, and you would still have to take action if it was acute and then get the records afterwards, because sometimes they wouldn't arrive for days on end, right? Depends on the organization sending the data, the paper record on the fax.
It had to be so tough prior to this information being available to have a person, a kid, whoever, come in unconscious. You don't know what's going on. As a practitioner, as a doctor, as a nurse, whatever, you sitting there, and the guesswork has to be so hard at that point.
Well, I think that's where their clinical expertise kicks in. And we've tended to see that, doctors with years of experience, nurses with years of experience are able to use their expertise to provide the best possible care with that lack of information. But being well informed with the information absolutely makes their lives easier and makes treatment easier to provide when you're well informed. And on the flip side, it also reduces the stress for the family, right? Because one thing to think about when you talk about pediatrics is you may be treating the child, but the whole family is involved. It's not just mother and father, it's maternal grandparents, paternal grandparents, uncles and aunties. So when you're seeing them bring in a child, the whole family descends, right? Typically, because they're concerned. And so it takes the tension level down a notch when the family knows that decisions are being made with the right data at the right place at the right time, right? Because if you miss an allergy, the consequences of that could be detrimental. But now you don't, because you see that, and then you can take action accordingly. And that makes the whole experience a lot better. So it's sometimes I like to say to people, when you're treating kids, you're actually treating entire families.
Yeah.
And so you have to be conscious of that. And everybody wants to know what's going on, what's going on, what's going on. But now they know that we don't have to ask you as much because you might not know, because we can request that information and it'll be available within minutes versus within days. And if it's an acute case in an emergency room, that helps massively. And we've seen this in all other industries, right? I mean, if you look at the airline industry, they wouldn't function if they didn't have that electronic exchange of information. When's the last time? I mean, even now, people don't even print their boarding pass. But the reality being, if that was the case, if we all had to go into a travel agent and make a booking, can you imagine what that was like? I remember doing that. I remember having to go years ago to a travel agent, and they would type into the terminal they had, because it was the only terminal connected to the airline. And then they would print out these tickets, but they couldn't do it the same day. And the seat and the reservation couldn't be confirmed the same day. So they would put in a request on the green screen, and they'd tell you to come back in 3 days to pick up your tickets and your confirmation, which they would print out on a slip of paper, because I'm that old. And can you imagine that? Can you now imagine that today?
No.
You're on a flight and your flight gets cancelled and you have to make a change, and you're just doing it on an app, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine if you went to the counter and they said, well, if you wait a couple of days, we'll get confirmation for you on the next, and then we'll print you out a ticket.
Right.
And sometimes people still face that even electronically because there's no next available flight, but at least they have some control.
Right.
Healthcare is still 10 to 12, 15 years behind everybody else when it comes to that seamless integration of how that experience is. It's getting better, but it isn't comparable to what you would experience in e-commerce or what you would experience in traveling or even booking a cruise, right? You just can't do that in healthcare. It's not like most people can pre-order all their meals 24 hours ahead of time before an inpatient visit. It's rare that happens.
Well, with the data too, there's also a privacy and security portion in healthcare that doesn't exist in other places. I mean, there's always security and privacy, but this is at another level.
Yeah, and the good thing is technology and the use of AI in security can help you secure that. And most importantly, patient data, there's two components. One is you're responsible for securing it, protecting it. And in pediatrics, we actually have to keep that data for 15 years post the last encounter at the hospital. But you can get consent, right? So if you go to a parent and say, I need your consent to get this information, it's still then the choice of the individual, right? And most times if their kid's super unwell and could not get into a situation where they're not going to make it, they'll give you the consent, and therefore you've secured it, you've got the approvals for it, and you get consent to use that for medical care only, not to, you're not selling the data per se, which is unlike other industries, right? Where you're sitting on your PC and boom, this offer comes up for Honolulu, Hawaii, because you've been looking at Hawaii and they know it. And
it's like,
I didn't ask them to share that, but they did.
All of a sudden you're going to get a boom. And we've got a heart. We've got a new heart for you because we know you're looking for one.
That's the interesting thing. That's something that does not happen. So we know we secure the patient data and we get the consent. Because no, that would never. Can you imagine? If you had a chronic condition and I have a few, and I'm sitting there and something pops up and says, you can do this, and we'll give you a discount, I would fall out of my chair. Because that means somebody would have given my data to someone.
Yeah. Got a couple more questions for you. And in this podcast, what we try to do is talk to people who are up and coming in IT, who might be looking to get to an executive role later on. So what would be some of your advice or advices that you could give to people? You've had plenty of victories. I'm sure you have plenty of pitfalls. What are some advices you'd give to other people that want to someday be in your shoes?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One, everybody needs a good mentor. People help people. You can't take this life journey on your own. It's just very difficult to do that. So if you have the opportunity in your own organization or outside your organization, seek out someone who may be open to having off-the-record conversations with you to help you grow, someone who you can bounce your ideas across. It's always useful to have a best friend at work because you need a sounding board because we're just human. And if you don't sound off, you'll end up taking that home and making your home life miserable. So always try and do that. I think continuous professional learning is really important. And taking on something that is outside your comfort zone. So, for example, if all you do is work on EMR in your career, then you're missing out on ERP. And maybe you should go to the leader of another team and say, I've got some bandwidth. Can I help out? And if you can, then you'll learn something new. And also, that will raise your profile in the organization. It's really hard. I think the funniest thing I find in healthcare is when you're sitting in a room and somebody makes a suggestion and then they ask for a volunteer, and guess what we do? We all look at each other. Same scenario when it says, does anybody have any comments today? And what do? We all look at each other around the room. So even though I'm not one to speak up, I've learned in my journey that I am always the first one to jump in with my comments. Why? Because guess what? The first person doesn't get it as hard as the next one. So if you jump in and give your comments, don't look around the room. Be the person to raise your hand. Be the person to volunteer your time. Be the person to go and observe. If you're working in healthcare, the best thing you can do, and if you're working in health IT and you want to grow, go and ask one of the surgeons if you can go and observe a surgery. It'll blow your mind. Now, of course, hopefully you're not queasy to blood, but the reality is if you can go in there with one of your best surgeons and watch them do a kidney transplant or a lung transplant or a liver transplant or even a heart transplant, that will change your entire perspective. Plus, it will give you face time with some of the powerful leaders in the organization who make the decisions on career growth. So you've got to be seen, you've got to be heard, and you've got to participate. So those were some of the things I've learned in my journey. They're difficult to do. Don't get me wrong. It's not easy to be that person. But if you are that person, you will be successful and you will grow your career. And if you can't find somebody in your organization, look outside the organization, look in the industry. I mean, funnily enough, there's lots of great people in our industry that believe in helping the next generation. I mean, truth be told, I have a lot of mentees, and the reality is I'm not going to be here forever. So if I don't leave some information with someone to carry that torch onto the next thing, then I'd be fooling myself. So yeah, people should reach out. LinkedIn is a good way of reaching out. It's not a good way of reaching out if you want to sell people something. Truth be told.
I absolutely hate it for sales now.
It does.
I get hit up.
Now.
How many people do you get every day who send you a connection request, and then after you accept it, 2 seconds later, bing?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm like,
I want to sell you this. I want to tell you about this. And I'll tell you, since we're on a podcast here, podcasts are quite difficult because the minute a podcast goes live, somebody in sales says, I heard your podcast and I really think the comments you made were interesting and I'd love to connect with you. And
yeah, you never listened to a word I said.
And then you connect with them, and guess what? The next thing they want to do is sell you something or have a conversation with you. What I think should be happening is those young people out there who may be listening, is you use LinkedIn to listen to people like me, and you can send me a LinkedIn request. And if you want to talk with me about your life, your career trajectory, I am more than happy to jump on a call for that. But not if you want to sell me the next shiny toy, because my job is to take care of patients, not to constantly field sales requests. But yeah, if you honestly came to me and said, I just want to talk to you about my career path, do you have an hour? I'll give you an hour. Because I learn just as much from people as people might learn from me. And I love talking to young people because I have to be honest and say I'm old. I don't necessarily understand Gen Z and how they think. And so by hiring in more Gen Z, which I've been doing, and working directly with them, having them report to me, I've learned so much about what the next generation thinks about, worries about, wants to interact, how they do their work. It's very different than how I do my work. So LinkedIn could be an amazing resource if you use it the right way. If you're a person who wants to be up and coming in this field, make sure your LinkedIn profile is neat and tidy. Don't post posts on LinkedIn that are irrelevant. Post posts that are relevant to your profession. I'm still seeing people posting posts about things which I think are inappropriate for LinkedIn. So don't do that, because recruiters do look at your LinkedIn profile. And if you are not updating your resume every quarter, you're missing out. I'm not saying leave your job. I'm saying make sure every single thing you've achieved is up to date on your resume every quarter so you are ready to go. Because you never know who you will bump into, who could be your next opportunity. I bump into people all the time. The first question I ask them is, can I look at your LinkedIn profile and do you have a resume? And I am so disappointed when people tell me, oh yeah, I haven't updated my resume. Can I have a week to update it and send it to you? By which point you've forgotten the person, right? You've moved on, you've lost the interest because you're bumping into so many people. So I think those are some things people should do, but reach out. The saying is reach out and touch someone and make that connection. We in leadership know we have to train people for the next generation. So most people will not shoo you away if you reach out, but they will if you reach out, say, great podcast, but by the way, I have another AI tool. That's the other drama. The number of people who have an AI tool in the last 2 months on AI is baffling, right? I want to show you this AI tool. And sometimes I have to say, well, AI, does it really mean another idiot?
Well, one of the things I was going to do here to close this up is just say that everything that is worthwhile, for the most part, is difficult. I tell everybody who works for me, if you're in an elevator, talk to people. If you're at an airport, talk to people. Just open up your mouth and have that human interaction with people, because you never know who you're talking to. And it's always worth a conversation.
Absolutely. And when you're delayed on flight sitting on the tarmac, you do meet a lot of people too.
Oh yeah. I talk to people everywhere I go, and it's fun. My 5-year-old Johnny is the most extrovert you ever want to meet. He wants to talk to everybody. And my wife's like, I don't like him talking to everybody. I'm like, no, that's me. That is exactly the way I was. You have to talk to people. The more people you talk to, the more good comes out of it. Most people are good. It's like, no matter what the media and social media and all that stuff tells us, most people are inherently good, and most people want to help other people, so going off of what you said about LinkedIn, when I have, most of what I do in my company is contracting. So when somebody's looking for a full-time position, I'm like, go to LinkedIn, find a job you want, find someone who's connected to that position, and you will easily get that job. If not that job, find another job and network your way into that position. That's all you have to do.
Yeah. And most importantly, the biggest takeaway is no matter who you interact with in this business, treat people with respect and kindness. So it's not that I don't get 100 requests for meetings, for sales calls, and my response to them isn't me. I reply to every single sales call I get with the answer that it's not something we're looking at this time. Thank you for reaching out. I'm never, because I also understand that person is trying to take care of their family by doing that job. They're not trying to make me miserable. I get that. But their job is to sell something, because if they sell something, then they feed their kids and take care of their family. So never be disrespectful, be kind in all your interactions, and you will see your life be different. And these relationships, and I'll use the analogy, I have a very big Rolodex because I'm that old. But
yeah, some Gen Zers right now saying, "What's a Rolodex?"
What's a Rolodex, right? So the reality is the networking and connections you make can live with you for a lifetime if people remember you because you were kind to them.
Exactly.
And I've done business with people after 20 years, but they remember that my first interaction with them wasn't one of me telling them, "How dare you reach out to me," type of scenario. The good news is with AI, you can automate some of those responses.
Well, I tell you what, it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate you joining me today. Again, it's been Dr. Zafar Chaudary. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And any closing comments?
No, thanks, John, for listening to my madness. But yes, it's been a pleasure to chat with you today, and I hope it brings value to some folks out there. But thanks to everyone who's listening in, and thank you, John.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of How in the Hell Did We Get Here podcast. I'm your host, John Zink, signing off, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks again.
The How in the Hell Did We Get Here podcast is brought to you by IT Avalon. For more information and links to other episodes, please visit johnzinkpodcast.com. We'll see you next time on How in the Hell Did We Get Here?
The future's right now.